Hello friends, welcome in today's lecture. Today we will start our last chapter, that is servlets. This chapter having 14 marks. First see the content of the servlet chapter. In the servlet chapter we will study about first the life cycle of the servlet. Second point is how to create the simple servlet program. In that we will study the servlet API, Java X servlet package, servlet interface, servlet config interface, servlet context interface, servlet request interface, servlet response interface, and generic servlet class. Next point in that we will study the Java X servlet HTTP package. In that we will study the HTTP servlet request interface, HTTP servlet response interface, HTTP session interface, cookies class, HTTP servlet class, HTTP session event class, and HTTP session binding event class. In the 6.4 we will study the handling the HTTP request and responses, also how to handle the HTTP GET request and how to handle the HTTP POST request. And at the last we will study what is the use of the cookie and session tracking. This is all about the servlet chapter content. Now let us start the first point, introduction to the servlets. Servlets is the Java program that run on the web server or the application server. So servlet are basically the Java program that run on the server. The servlets are used to handle the request obtained from the web server. For that, first process the request, produces the responses, and then send responses back to the web server. So servlet technology is used to create the web application. Servlet technology uses the Java language to create the web application. Means the main use of the servlet is to create the web application, and for that servlet use the Java language. The servlet class is initiated when the web server begins the execution, and the execution of the servlet is managed by the servlet container such as Tomcat. Means for running the servlet program we need to Tomcat server. The servlet container is used in Java for dynamically generate the web pages on the server side. So web server contains the static pages and also dynamic pages. See what is the servlet. Means servlet is where the servlet is used. And what is the servlet? Servlet can be described in many ways depending on the context. Servlet is a technology which is used to create a web application. It is an API that provides the many interfaces and classes including the documentation. Means servlet provides the many interfaces and classes that include the documentation. Servlet is an interface that must be implemented for creating any servlet. Servlet is a class that extends the capabilities of the servlet and respond to the incoming request. It can respond to any request. Servlet is a web component that is deployed on a server to create a dynamic web page. So any servlet program is run on a web server, and for that the Tomcat server is used. So the main use of the servlet is to run on a web server and create the web application. For that we use the servlet. Next point is working of how servlet works. This diagram shows the working of the servlet. Means how the servlet works. First, client make a request for a servlet and actually uses the web browser in which request is written in a URL. So first client is request to the web server in the form of the URL. Then web browser then send the request to the web server, and web server first find the request related to the servlet, and then obtained a servlet gather the relevant information in order to satisfy the client request and build the web page accordingly. So first step is the client send the request to the server, then responses is gathered at the runtime. The web server gather the information related to the request, and then responses is sent to the client. Means in that total 3 steps is there. First, client make a request for some servlet, and it uses the actually web browser for sending a request and that request return in a URL. Then web browser send the request to the web server, and web server first find the requested servlet, and then obtained a servlet gather the relevant information, and that gathered information sent to the particular client, and that build a web page according to the request. So the particular web page is then displayed to the client. So it is all about the working of the servlet. Next, see the advantages of the servlet. The servlet are very efficient in their performance and get the executed in the address space of belonging to the web server. So one of the advantage of the servlet is to get the better performance. Second is servlets are the platform independent. Also the servlet contains our working is based on the request and response. Means client send the request and web browser or web server send the response of a particular request. This is one of the advantages. Then also the servlet provide the dynamic documentation. This is one type of advantage. Also the multiple user can keep the coordination between the different servlets. Next point is the life cycle of the servlet. In the life cycle of the servlet there are 3 important methods. First is init method, second is service method, and third is destroy method. First, client enters in the URL in the web browser and make a request. Then browser then generate the HTTP request and send it to the web server. And that time we need the 3 methods: init, service, and destroy. These 3 methods are present in the life cycle of the servlet. So life cycle of the servlet contains the 3 methods: init method, service method, and destroy method. See, this diagram shows the life cycle of the servlet. In that the first client enter in the URL in the web browser. Means first client enter into the web browser and make a request. Then web browser generate the HTTP request and send the web server. This is the web browser. Then web server make the request corresponding to the servlet. Means this web server make a request of a corresponding servlets. In servlet contains the init method, service method, and destroy method. The init method, the server is basically invokes the init method of a servlet. Means init method is the initiative method. This method called as only when the servlet is loaded in a memory for a first time. So init method is called only once in the program, and this method used only when the servlet is loaded into the memory. And using this method, the initialization parameter can also be passed on to the servlet in order to configure the servlet. So main use of the init method is to load the servlet into the memory first time and initialization the parameter. Second method is service method. The server can invoke the service method for a particular HTTP request, and using the service method, servlet can then read the data provided by the HTTP request with the help of the service method. So the use of the service method is to provide the particular HTTP request. And third method is destroy. Finally, the server unload the servlet from the memory using the destroy method. Means when the web server unload the servlet from the memory, that time the destroy method is used. Init method is used to load the servlet in the memory first time, and destroy method is used to unload the servlet from the memory. These three are the methods in the life cycle of the servlet. Next, see the steps of the life cycle of the servlet. First, servlet class is loaded. Second, servlet instance is created. Third, init method is invoked. Then service method is invoked and destroy method is invoked. These steps to write the program of the servlet, means how to servlet load in the memory, and after working of the servlet, when the servlet is destroyed from the memory. And for that, first servlet is loaded, second servlet instance is created, third step is init method is invoked, fourth step is service method is invoked, and fifth step is destroy method is invoked. First, servlet class is loaded. The class loader is responsible to load the servlet class. Means the servlet class uses the class loader to load the servlet class. Then servlet class is loaded when the first request for the servlet is received by the web container. Second step is servlet instance is created. The web container creates the instance of the servlet after loading the servlet class. Means the web container creates the instance of the servlet after loading the servlet class. Second, the instance is created when the first step is completed. The servlet instance is created only once in the servlet lifecycle. The execution of the servlet is managed by the servlet container, and the servlet container is used in the Java for the dynamic generate the web pages or the web server side. So main use of the servlet container is to create a dynamic web pages on the server side. Therefore, servlet container is the part of the web server and that interact with the servlet for handling the dynamic web pages for the client. So basically, web container, main use of the web container is to create a dynamic web pages or generate the dynamic web pages, and that web container creates the instance of the servlet after loading the servlet class. Third step is init method is invoked. The web container calls the init method only once after creating the servlet instance. Means after creating the servlet instance, the web container calls the init method, and init method is called only once in the program. The init method is used to initialize the servlet. It is the lifecycle method of the Java x.servlet.servlet interface. So syntax of the init method is public void init servlet config throws servlet execution. So this is the syntax of the init method. Fourth step is service method is invoked. The web container calls the service method each time when the request for a servlet is received. Means the service method is called more and more time when the request for a particular servlet is received. If the servlet is not initialized, it follows the first three steps as described in the above slide, and then call the service method. So the service method call when first three steps is completed. If the servlet is initialized, it call the service method, and if the servlet method is not initialized, then first follow the first three steps and then call the service method. Servlet is initialized only once, and the syntax of the service method is public void service servlet request, request, servlet response, response, throws, servlet exception and IO exception. Here servlet request and servlet response both are the methods, and request is an object of the servlet requester and response is the object of the servlet response. And the last step is destroy the method is invoked when the web container call the destroy method before removing the servlet instance from the service. The destroy method is mainly used to destroy the or unload the servlet in the memory. It gives the servlet an opportunity to clean up any resources, for the example memory, thread, etc. So destroy method used for the clearing the memory, thread, and the syntax of the destroy method is public void destroy. So at the last, the web container call the destroy method for removing the servlet instance from the service. So these 5 steps describes the life cycle of the servlet. First step is class loaded, second is servlet class instance created, third is init method is invoked, fourth is service method is invoked, and fifth is destroy method is invoked. These 5 steps describes the life cycle of the servlet.